Hello and welcome to the show. We are back on GTA 5 continuing the Los Santos Rally Championship. We head on to stage 3, moving towards the, more middle part of the map. The sports cars are up first. I would be setting off with the GB200. That had proved to be rather difficult to drive. It has a tendency to like to fall over. Now this stage, predominantly dirt. A little bit of tarmac in a couple of places, but a largely dirt stage with some very treacherous roads. Roads that we were expecting to see some cars roll over on. This first part, well, you see the bumps already. A huge mid-air twitch for the GB200. Somehow didn't fall over in all of that. Probably one of those violent twitches from a car. It bounced. It got caught up. So this road itself, there's a lot of kind of bumpy parts to it. Really easy to upset a car that is prone to falling over, so it was a case of gingerly through this first section. A little bit of a tarmac straight, make the most of the car's acceleration. We can slow down for this chicane. Don't hit any hay bales. They're an easy thing to clip on the inside. A bit of airtime for the car down towards a hairpin. Now this kind of like dusty concrete. It's got a fair amount of grip. This bit here fairly flat, fairly level, not too many issues for my vehicle. Flat out jaunt through here back onto the proper dirt. Not the worst circuit for the rear wheel drive or the two wheel drive cars to deal. You can again see the car, this is the back end, very unsettled across the bumps. Now we get into some of the more fiddly bits. We run underneath the bridge up this. It's a little bit narrow in places, up this kind of tarmac, remade tarmac hill around the hairpin. We head. This is the most treacherous part of the road. The bumps, very easy to get into a lot of trouble around these corners. While that corner there looked smooth, all it takes is slightly clipping the inside or slightly clipping one of the bumps wrong and the car will go up onto two wheels. Actually get a little bit oversteery through there, but catch it all together. This next turn is one of the nastiest on the course. Very difficult to spot, very difficult to judge, and that gets me into trouble. Just running a little bit too wide, clipped the bridge. I missed the turning point. The speed was good, I just turned in too late and ended up in towards the bridge. Again, more on the rather tricky corners through here. Don't hear that inside man of dirt. You can see how to take it quite easy through here because it will just flip the car over if you hit it again. It wants to go up into two wheels, it doesn't through this section. It does a little bit on the next corner, but we keep it together. Another tight hairpin. You can't really afford to run too wide through there. There's a lot of stuff on the outside to clonk into. Then we've got a high-speed tarmac run now down towards the finish line here with, of course, one very nasty chicane to come. That's completely blind chicane as we head down the hill. Well, down this hill, over this bridge, and around a left-hander is where you suddenly find this big stop for the cars. You can carry good speed through there if you get it right, but it's difficult. The back end lets go completely with a huge slide for the car. There's just no grip at the back of the GB200. There's none at all, and then flat out down the hill. A little water splash to end the stage as well. Dive through there and across the line for the GB200. Almost manages to roll as it crosses the finish line. So this stage is full of its challenges. The Flash GT that would run next, and this was challenging for the overall lead of the rally. Got a little bit bounced around. I mean, one of the more stable cars. From the Sumo, I remember this thing being able to be pushed over very easily, but in the grand scheme of these rally stages, one of the more stable cars, one of the easier vehicles to drive through these routes. No major problems for the Flash throughout this one, other than that little bouncing around at the start. The rest was a lovely, clean run. The Comet Safari was continuing to be remarkably consistent through all of this. It wasn't the fastest car in a straight line, but it was very consistent. Didn't make very many mistakes through these stages. There had been some little ones from the car in the first couple, but there wasn't many. It runs a little bit wide, scrapes the wall. You'll get away without losing too much time with all that. And the Comet Safari just continued to be consistent, make minimal amount of mistakes. Good, it's all-wheel drive, so you get good traction around these corners, and surprisingly doesn't tip over as much as you might possibly expect. Now this stage was always going to be a little bit more difficult for the two-wheel drive cars. Liam Sentinel Classic running the first of the three two-wheel drives in the sports category, and this could get into trouble with these cars, and it's a bump and a spin for the Sentinel. It just clipped the crest wrong, and the weight transfer just threw it around. Again, it's not the worst crash in the world, but you're going to lose a few seconds. You can see it struggling a little bit for grip around these dirt hairpins. This is where that all-wheel drive is going to make a small difference. I mean, this is GTA. It's not the greatest simulation of rallying and so on. But yeah, there'll be a little time loss through there. The Tropos rally of level 8 had probably had the biggest crash up until now on the second stage. It was flying, trying to make up some time, and a little bit too brave. There's a massive wheelie from the car. I say flying to pick up the tyre quite literally at that particular juncture. Just carried a load of speed trying to make the most of the run and got a little bit wide. And that can happen. Alright, while it is a wider stage on the most part here, you can still push the limits. It's not as narrow, no, as the hills were, as the tarmac bits were, but you can still get yourself in all sorts of trouble, although that was the only problem for the Tropos around here. The Kuruma was another vehicle having problems with rolling, if anything worse than my GB200, and that's saying something, because the GB200 was not the most stable vehicle in the world. The Kuruma was having a relatively good run, but this was always potential to be a problematic stage for the car. The first part of the run isn't too bad, but later on we see two-wheel antics get the better of Kruber. Goes for a roll. I mean, it's a typical, like a proper rally car roll. It rolls, lands back on its wheels, foot down, and it is off and away. But that's not going to be helpful. You know, you don't really want your vehicle to be falling over, and unfortunately Bumpy also pretty much exactly the same as I did. Just, you got the speed right, but turned in too late for that corner. Clonked the bridge, but not as bad as the tumble. The second of the Tropos in Pega's car would be off next. Again, it was fairly similar. In fact, they are fairly similar with the other two rear-wheel drive cars in that it didn't lose as much time as you might expect through these dirt stages, but you did have to be a little bit more careful. Plenty of commitment from the car, big airtime, very nearly clunking that one into the wall, but this bumpy section here was difficult to say the least. The Tropos was all over the place, but it got back on the course. It stayed together, and after it was a little bit of a scare, certainly playing on the limits through there. The Tropos would get through the stage, no issues. The Sultan, much like the Kuruma, was also prone. Not as bad as the Kuruma for tipping over, but it was certainly something that you had to be aware of. And with this one, it was a little too much on the inside. Less, I guess, sort of two-wheeled, sort of clip the rock, I think, on the inside. Very much have been don't cut, I think, command on that corner. Just pinged off it and went for a roll. It's all a quick spin around and would get the vehicle back going again. And this one not hitting the bridge. Most cars did at least scrape the bridge, whether they hit it hard or not. Most little scrape along there, but not so much for the Sultan. Now, the Sultan Classic. We talked about this in the previous one. It was our leader going into this stage, and it would have a moment very similar to the Sentinel Classic. Got caught out on the bumps, ended up out a little bit wide, and went for a big spin. Got recovered, you know, didn't lose too much time. There was space there to recover. Set plus point at this stage, a little bit wider. You could get away with a smidge more with the cars, but it was, potentially dangerous. So this stage, though, did suit the Sultan a little bit more. This car is all straight line speed, not so good with the handlings. We see another big slide from the car through the chicane, but it can make up for it with a blinding pace. And despite those issues, it still went fast. It's only just, though, very, very close at the top of the table. The Sultan Classic taking victory by, well, 0.3 of a second from the Flash GT. Ewan continued that consistency with the Comet in third. The Tropos Rally of level 8 would be fourth ahead of my Vapid GT. I think Impega took it a bit easy on that stage, trying not to bin the car. No obvious mistakes, but was a little bit slower. The Sentinel, despite that big off at the start, would be seventh ahead of the Sultan. We saw had a big roll off of a rock, and Bumpy also having troubles with the Kuruma, for the roll. I think had a further two-wheeled antics later on in the run as well, so Kuruma struggling on that stage. Now, as far as the overall times go, Danger Man continues to lead the way. It's a 7-second gap, remains consistent with Angus's Flash. Ewan remains in third, about 6 seconds down the road from the rear-wheel drive battle that is pretty close between the two Troposes and the Sentinel Classic. I had flashes of speed, but too many issues with the GB200. There's so many problems with the car being up on two wheels, the car going for a roll, and all of that sort of thing would, not be ideal for me. However, we would be clear of the Sultan and Kuruma. They were also suffering similar fates. I lost time being cautious. I lost time with near misses. They did get themselves into trouble. So, we move on to the Sports Classic class. Up first would be Lado with the retinue that had been occasionally fast, occasionally in trouble, and a little bit lost at times. We almost had the James May Award for the second time. Little clip on the hay bale, just carrying too much speed up at that section would spit the car wide. Some time lost in that one. It isn't the worst issue. This stage would prove challenging for the sports classic cars. That much is for sure. It's a little too much speed. Another chicane with a bit too much speed and a clonk on the hay bale. That blind crest catching out vehicles for class honours, if you will, at the top of the sports classic area. That was very much the battle of the two Silvestras. Blakey was a little bit down on Gliska's time and was desperately trying to claw some of that back, and things would go relatively well for the car through this third stage. We sort of catch it flying down. This section is good fun with the vehicle. When you've got the grip, you can throw the car down here with a lot of speed. You've got to make sure you get it stopped for this next quite nasty corner, using all of the road through there. But the Silvestras were definitely the ones to try and beat. They didn't have any toppling over issues. That's always a bonus. That one. Stevie was trying to recover from a bit of a less than ideal start, having had issues. The 190Z was quick when could be kept all together, and again another clean stage for that 190 flying down towards the chicane. That's more like it through that one. I mean, you're working on such fine margins. They're not that tight a chicane, so you can carry a lot of speed when you get it right. That was mighty close to the hay bale through all of that as we run up towards the finish line. You can actually get into a lot of trouble if you hit the big banks. You can tip the car a long way onto its side running towards the finish line, but no such issues for the 190Z. Pigalis, well, they were a curious one. They did struggle a little bit on the handling department. They just simply didn't have the grip of some of the other cars, but on these sort of longer, faster stages, perhaps they were not too bad if you could keep it all together. You see it bouncing around. It's a really horrible section that it doesn't look like much, and when you're right on board with the cars, it doesn't necessarily look all that challenging, but you can see as soon as we get into these hairpins, it is not fun. Just understeer central from the front wheel drive machine. They can get quite twitchy sometimes, but in these sections, their issues were they just didn't have the grip some of the other cars. The Zion Classic, that was also having a relatively good run through the stage, although a big bobble manages to keep it. That could have gone so much worse. Big bobble under brakes across some uneven terrain, and that nearly got spat off the bridge at that point. The angle that was approaching, not where you want. You do not want to fall into that ravine. That would be a bad time. Did really well to manage to gather that one all back up and keep it pointing the right way. That was the near miss for the Zion Classic through here. You can see it bouncing around. It looks great. The cars do look fantastic along some of these like cinematic cameras, shall we say, with the cars sort of bouncing and moving around across the uneven terrain. The Michele GT was struggling a little bit for pace overall with these stages. It just was not quite as fast as some of the cars, although it wasn't making too many mistakes. That being said, a huge twitch for the vehicle. It was a clean run up until, the back end kind of got airtime. Big fight for control on the vehicle. Almost got spat sideways, gathered it all back up to run towards the finish line. Big airtime for the Michele as it crosses the finish line. The second of the Pigalis would, funnily enough, have very similar issues. It was having, you can see it just doesn't really want to get turned through these sections. It doesn't want to get turned, and then you do occasionally get a big oversteer. It's a strange front-wheel drive car to drive, this one. But it's big understeer moments through here. Both of them being a bit, some curious moments across the bumps, shall we say, but nothing major on this one. Again, up towards another hairpin. You just lose. This is that time you lose trying to get the car to turn through there. The Silvestras just don't have that problem. The Zion Classic doesn't have that problem as such. They will make it up on the straights, of course, but Gliska was, leading going into this stage. It was a nice comfortable margin, really, for the Silvestra. Most important thing at this point was just don't make any silly mistakes. You've got to be quick, of course. You've got to be pushing the vehicles because, the others are going to be doing the same thing. You can't back off too much, but you can't afford to be making mistakes. Barring a little running wide that, as I said, just about everybody hit that bridge one way or another. That was about it for the Silvestra. Aside, a big two-wheel moment could have been disastrous. It ended up not really costing any time at all. Looked spectacular, but time lost was minimal. You can still see it's being pushed on, despite the lead, going for the throw the car out of the course approach. A little bit more careful up over the crest there, which is good. It was close at the top of the leaderboard. Gliska would take the stage victory by a couple of seconds from Blakey Silvestre. They were very much the vehicles to have. The Zion Classic not that far down, only 3 seconds down for third place. That would beat the Pagani. Chris's Pagani would sit in fourth ahead of the 190Z. That's splitting the big front-wheel drive machines. That would be in sixth. It is very, very close, actually, from sort of fourth down to eighth is very, very close. With all of those vehicles putting in, I say relatively clean runs. Lado's car was quick, considering that had a couple of big shunts. That could have been very fast, actually, around on that one. Now, the overall results continue to be Silvestre's 1-2. Gliska pulling a little bit further west. Blakey's still just about in touching distance if anything goes wrong, but that is a nice margin to have. The Zion Classic would be splitting up the Pagalis now. Chris will be in third with Hyper in fourth ahead of Ollie's Pagali in fifth. Lado would be, would hold on to sixth. The 190Z trying to regain some of that time lost early on up into seventh. It was certainly, there were sort of three battles. There's sort of the two at the front, the battle for third, and then the battle for sixth that was going on within the Sports Classic. Now, for stage 4, this was a nasty one. I mean, you can tell by the start location, we are going to be tackling kind of the dangerous road, the canyon stages. This surface has very, very little grip. Unlike that previous stage, there's no margin for error here either, and if things do go wrong on this stage, you fall off into the river, or you don't have a nice recovery around here. It's bumpy, as I said, very, very slidey. You can see how much the GP200 is struggling up this section. It's a tough part of the map, a tough rally stage indeed. A little bit of a kind of made-up bridge, if you like, to swap sides here. We're going to have, around a left-hander here to a very quick descent down the hill. You do not want to run wide. There are bumps. The back of the car is going to get upset. As you can see, I'm having to fight the GB200 an awful lot down here. Get the car stopped, get it turned for this next section. You don't want to be clipping the bridges either, of course. There's plenty of bits of scenery to clonk your car into trouble to get into. Now, you can be brave. I was more cautious over this section. You can go for the huge airtime. I just wanted to get through the run without making any mistakes. That was what we were going for, and I probably had one of the more difficult cars just to keep it pointing the right direction, because the back end it wanted to be doing something, or it wanted to go up onto its side, or it wanted to be another two-wheel moment through there. It's so difficult to make sure the car stayed pointing the right way. More bouncing from the vehicle, almost like just a half spin that you fight to catch. Now, this was the shortest stage of the rally. Kind of grateful for it, because it was definitely one of the most challenging for the vehicles. Once we get it sort of fed up this hill, a much wider chicane through here. We could try and carry speed. Not that I had any rear end grip to go with my car. And now we're on to the tarmac, up towards what is probably one of the nastiest corners, full stop, in this rally. This very deceptive right-hander. You want to kind of turn in sort of on a sensible line, but the cliff drops away, and it's so difficult to see at what point. I turned in a bit too soon. We got through it. It wasn't the best run I could have hoped for through that section. My hope with this whole stage would be don't make mistakes and that others would. I was hoping we could make up some time by not crashing, and that we would see other vehicles get into trouble. The thing is, the sports cars did surprisingly well on what is the most difficult stage. There were less issues than expected. You saw the Tropos absolutely throw itself down that hill, millimetres away from disaster, and I feel like that was a lot of people's runs around here. You could be, just millimetres away from an absolutely massive crash. Huge two-wheel moment again from the Tropos. Braver over the jump, but by no means the biggest jump that we would see around here. It flies on to this back section. You can see that I'm watching the Tropos. It just moves around less. From the say that as it gets a big slide, but that's the first time you see the back end really letting go. And with the GB, it was always moving. It was a good run for Pega to keep that car clean through all of that. The Zion Classic, again, another rear-wheel drive vehicle. The rear-wheel drives would suffer perhaps a little bit more around this stage. A lot of slow speed stuff to get the vehicles into trouble with. Heading down to this really nasty corner, almost almost getting into a lot of trouble for Liam there. Just kept it together. I mean, it fell off the road, but thankfully it fell off right at the very end, a bit where it could get away with, a bit where it could land on some concrete and carry on. It's across the line. Probably new trousers needed for the Sentinel, but it did make it to the finish line. Now, the GB200 had issues going up on its side. Bumpy would have even more with the Kuruma. Huge airtime, maybe a little bit too much. I mean, that one less so with the car, just slightly mispositioned it on the jump. Went for the big airtime, didn't quite get the landing zone correct. Car goes for a tumble. It does land back on its wheels to carry on. This is the sort of section, though, that the Kuruma is difficult to drive on. Again, little too fast, little mispositioned in a big airtime moment. Not where the Kuruma needed. It's going to have to grab a reverse and go for a turnaround. It just didn't really go well for the Kuruma at this stage. You can see how much the back end is actually being lifted across any one of these bumps. It's had a bad time. It was a bad time indeed for that car. Now the Flash GT, it was certainly still within a shout of this one, and this is a stage that was good for Angus. The Flash was the grippiest car here, and I mean, the main competitor, that Sultan Classic, was not going to enjoy this stage. The Sultan was all about straight line speed and struggled with the twisty bits. This is where the Flash was going to excel it, and it needed to. It needed to make up some time. But, you know, there was only one more stage to go after this. If it wanted a chance of winning, it was going to have to be quick, and was going to have to not make mistakes, so no pressure really. It bobbles its way down the hill and very nearly clonks the wall, but that was as bad as it would get for Angus's car. It would stay out of the wall and the rest of the run would be remarkably clean, and that was very, very important. Ewan's Comets, I mean, as I said with the previous stage, it continued to just be consistent. The vehicle's like a straight line speed would not really be a problem around this stage. As I said, with the exception of maybe the end part, this was all twisty stuff. Most of the time was made up in the twisty sections. Had a little clonk on the bridge. Again, considered like all the mistakes made by the Comet, which little bumps, you know, lost a tiny bit of time pinging off the bridge, but again, nothing major. The rest of the run being clean. I mean, you don't see the car bouncing around onto its side down this section. We see a lot of trees through there. Little bit of two-wheel, but all nicely controlled as we run through this next fast section. Yeah, consistency was so very important with these. Front end got a little bit more airtime through there than I was expecting it to. Just a little wheelie, as you do at however many miles an hour Forza GTA wants to have the cars be doing. Level 8 would continue to be of the throw the Tropos at the course and see what happens attitude, and it was quick. It was quick in between some problems. That bump, we saw the Comet get a big wheelie through there. That was enough to send the Tropos for a spin. Unusual. It was not the car I expected necessarily to see go for a spin. It had been relatively planted through most of this, but obviously carrying a huge amount of speed, enough to upset the back of the car and just launch it around through all of that. But a good recovery, considering how narrow that stage is. To have lost as little time as that from a crash is pretty damn good going. Nick's Sultan, that would get too much airtime and find itself in a rock and some more airtime and a big tumble for the car. Yeah, there is a kind of a crest, if you like, across there. Most vehicles weren't having, I'd say, too many issues at that section, but if you mispositioned your run-up, mispositioned your approach to that, you were going to get launched, as you saw, into a rock, and you just can't deal with it. That was where Angus also had a big sideways moment down there. The Sultan also keeping it out of the wall. Minimal amount of time lost through all of that. Little clonk on the inside of the bridge as well, just for good luck, but the rest not too bad. The Sultan Classic, this was always going to be one of its tougher stages, and you can see it's having little problems, nothing too bad down the hill. Unfortunately, though, it was at the very bottom, not the place we expected perhaps to see cars have issues. Also running wide and clonking. Another bridge that's going to just collect paint on it, really. Yeah, it just could not get the vehicle under control at the bottom of the hill. A humongous jump, and amazingly got away on the landing, hit the rock face, but got the car back pointing the right way on that one. I mean, yeah, that's what I'm saying. It can be a very big jump if you want to go for it. Yeah, little issues for the Sultan there. It could have been a lot worse for a crash, but something it really didn't need in such a sort of close fought-for round. And well, Angus would take victory of the stage, and it is a very important one because it was well clear of the Sultan Classic. Ewan would claim second with that Comet Safari. The Sentinel Classic would do well. In fact, all the rear-wheel drive cars would be third, fourth, and fifth, very, very close together. We're only talking a couple of seconds separating all three of them on what is the toughest stage. Sultan Classic, that was down in 6th place. That is a big chunk of time gone. Yes, it had one mistake, but it also was not massively fast through that course. My GB200 did not like the bumps, and I had to drive very carefully to not have a big accident, but that did make it slow. We would, though, beat Nick's Sultan and Bumpy's Kuruma. Overall, well, Danger Man still leads, but it's by just a single second. Very close at the front. Angus right there now. Ewan would remain in 3rd. Not a crazy comfortable 3rd, sort of 10 seconds down on the leaders, but nearly 10 seconds clear of the chasing pack. Just continues with the consistency. It was close, 4th, 5th and 6th. The 3 rear-wheel drive cars all within a second of one another. I was in a little bit of no man's land further back with that GB200. Bumping related issues for me. Nick would remain 8th clear of Bumpy's, often falling over Kuruma. We move on to the sports classic vehicles on what, as I said, the most difficult stage probably on the rally, and there would certainly be some spills with this lot. Lado would be running first and clip the inside, carried a bit too much speed over the crest, clip the sort of inside dirt. It was enough just to lift the car up onto 2 wheels, and at that particular position, that is not where you want to be getting onto your side. Car went for a couple of rolls down the hill. Could have been a lot worse. Almost missed the bridge. Big twitch from the vehicle. Of course, with all of these being rear-wheel drive, they're all much lighter. There's another 2-wheel moment, scrapes on the door. All of these being rear-wheel drive, much lighter than the sports cars themselves. They got thrown about a lot on this. Gliska, a huge jump, much like Danger Man's jump across there. Very nearly got in a lot of trouble with the Silvestre. Landed it kind of on just beside the rock, but it kept it on its wheels. Again, 2-wheel moment through that fast right-hander. But most importantly, for Gliska, would remain a clean run. No big issues around here. It was a clean run and a pretty damn fast one as well. There was no big offs, no big mistakes, but still plenty of commitment and plenty of speed from the car as we run up the hill. Yeah, a couple of close near misses, a couple of 2-wheeled scares around here. The Pagalis, much like with the Sultan Classic, much like with the previous stage, this was a twisty technical one, and there wasn't really the straights for the cars to make up the time on, so you just lost a bit of time with them. Now, Chris would get the Pagani through here relatively clean, and that was very, very important on this one. Blasting down towards the final corner, almost gets in trouble, just gets the car stopped. I mean, that was almost more trouble than Liam got with the Sentinel through that part of the circuit, but did gather it all back up before it went skating off the circuit. Yeah, Pagalis were not easy to drive through that section, and there wasn't the straights really required for them to make up their time. As I said last time, that car guys, Michele, were struggling a little bit for pace. However, this was the circuit where making sure you kept things clean was the most important part. And Michele made it through without any big problems, and that is so important on this particular stage. It might not quite have the performance of some of the other cars, but was able to keep it out of trouble. A little bit wide coming off of the bridge, unlike the Sultan that went for a big flight across the rocks. They managed to get it turned away from the rocks. Yeah, it was a little bit wide, but on the grand scheme of things around this route, not the worst possible mistake you could have made. You see, Blakey was now chasing and was running out of stages, running out of time to do much about catching Gliska's Silvestre. And the problem is, when you are pushing those cars a little bit harder, especially on a stage like this, you could make up time, yes, if you got it right, but there was plenty of opportunities to lose time, and it was a bit of a running wide moment for the Silvestre, and everything would go wrong. It bounced around, almost ended up in the river. Thankfully for Blakey, it landed on its wheels, could drive back onto the stage and carry on. That's where Danger Man had the off with the Sultan Classic as well. Just a little too much speed on the way down there, car out of position across a bump, and you just don't have time to recover it. The stage is unforgiving, as Hyper would also find out with the Zion Classic. Off the start line, things would go quite badly wrong for the big BMW, essentially running up the hill. Got too much on the dirt bank, onto 2 wheels, and got fired off the course. And there is no margin for error along here. you don't have time to gather the car back up. You don't have time to get the car back onto its wheels if you do clip that, or most places you don't. Occasionally you get lucky, but most of the places on the track where that happened, you were going to be in a lot of trouble, and also more trouble for the Zion with a bit too much airtime over the bridge jump. It was not a good start. The rest of the run would be okay for the Zion, but it was not an ideal run. The 190Z of Stevie, that would, well, have a good run up until the final couple of corners, with C vehicles get into trouble, and the 190Z, too much speed around the hairpin and tumbling off the course, it would go. A couple of people had just got away with running wide through there, and the 190Z pushed it a little bit too much. It's a super difficult corner to get right. It's a completely blind corner with a horrible drop-off on it. I mean, I had trouble getting my car turned into it, but yeah, that is not what you need from the vehicle. So Stevie, having been doing well making up time, unfortunately would lose a bunch of it right at the very end of the stage. The other Pagani, Ollie's Pagani, would also have a similar issue at the same corner. Fairly clean run through the stage up until this hairpin. I mean, it looks fine from some of these angles, but when you're driving the car, it's so difficult. Turn in too soon, bounce down the first part of the cliff, and of course the front wheels suddenly end up in the air. You're not turning anymore. Car goes tumbling off. Less spectacular than the 190Z's fall, although it very nearly had a secondary roll when resetting and kind of relaunching the car. Launched it kind of halfway off the cliff. It was a punishing stage, and the sports classic cars certainly had their fair share of adventures, shall we say, around this one, as Ollie would make it across the finish line. Perhaps unsurprisingly, Gliska would take the stage victory, a comfortable margin of victory in this as well. Chris's Pagani would be second. The Michele GT would end up in third by virtue of having a nice, clean, sensible run. It would get a third place for the stage. Blakey would be fourth, not the worst off imaginable, but it's a big chunk of time lost in that battle with Gliska, and yeah, put it a long way back overall. Ollie would be fifth with the Pagani. We saw the big tumble at the end of the stage. Lado also had a couple of rolls along the way, down in sixth. Stevie's hard work undone a little bit by, again, a further couple of rolls at the almost final corner, and Hyper very nearly went for a swim down at the bottom. As far as the overall results go, not crazy changes in position in this lot, but the gap certainly did. Gliska with a very comfortable margin up at the top from Blakey in second. The Pagani would stay in third, although it had actually got considerably closer to that for Silvestre following that good run. The Zion Classic would remain in fourth, well, mostly by virtue of the fact the Pagani had just as bad of a run almost as the Zion, both fall away a little bit from the battle for third. Lado would be sixth with that retinue, a couple of seconds ahead of the Michele GT, while Stevie's 190Z would fall further off the bottom. It would be certainly a challenging third and fourth stage. A lot of rolls in this one. That's well, we call it the dangerous road for a reason, and it certainly lived up to its name, that part of the map. It was spectacular, but there was certainly plenty to play for going into the final stage. You will get to find out what happens with that tomorrow. That, though, is going to be it from me. Thank you all very much for watching, and until next time, a goodbye.